Nigeria Gas Flare Commercialization Program, which he created. I'll be interested, if time permits, in finding out where we are with that program. But earlier in his career, he also worked as a senior consultant in the oil and gas and policy matters at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where he was part of the team that advised the Nigerian government on reforms and restructuring of the petroleum sector, including the development of a natural gas strategy for Nigeria, and supervised a study directed to restructure and revive the internal market for LPGs in Nigeria. Gbite, you've been involved in this for a bit of a time, and I'm looking to tap into your wealth of experience. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It is indeed a pleasure for me to be on this next year forum. I've really enjoyed all the work you've been doing over time, and this is a great opportunity for me to chat on the next big thing, which is Excellent. How we reform the petroleum sector through legislation.
Excellent, excellent. So first of all, let's start from the very top, right? What's the status of the oil and gas space globally? And it appears we are approaching a post-oil world. And should Nigerians be worried?
That's a very big question. Okay, let me respond this way. We are seeing the last quartile of the global oil and gas industry as we know it. Mm-hmm. So basically, all Nigerians better be awake, right, and try to understand what it means for their future. Because petroleum is in the very heart of Nigeria's political economy. Mm-hmm. When you look around all that happens around the political space, because it's not a development-minded or structured political system, it's an extractive political system. With the oil industry going towards its last quartile, this portends a lot for us politically, number one, but also portends a huge amount for us economically. If we're no longer going to have the oil revenues we expect to be earning within the next 10 to 15 years, because that's really when everything sunsets, 10 to 15 years time, it means the Nigerian window is very short. It's a narrow, short window. It requires a lot of attention by the people in the political system in ensuring that harm doesn't result to Nigeria. Harm is coming our way. I'm talking about the result. Right. Okay. So it's basically, what do we need to do over the next, over right now, and over the next 10 to 15 years to avert the adverse consequences that will be meted on Nigeria if we do nothing? That's a challenge.
Excellent.
The world is changing.
Okay, so for 20 years, we've been trying to pass this petroleum industry bill. We haven't been able to do it. We're now in the last quartile of the petroleum industry as we know it. Why bother? Why continue to talk about it since we're almost at the sunset? So maybe if you help us unpack why we even started talking about the petroleum industry bill and why we should still be interested in passing that bill 20 years later. Okay.
As of 20 years ago, we all knew that we were running the petroleum industry in a very sloppy manner, right? We're not getting the right outcomes from it the way we should. How's that? Nigeria is a mature oil province. So basically, we've gone the full cycle of investment, of return. We have a territory that's significantly explored. Finding oil in Nigeria is one of the easiest things to do in relation to many other provinces. That's why it's mature. What results should be superior economic returns to the country and development. That hasn't happened because we fail to do many other things. Governance of the sector is at the heart of the problem, including issues around Oof, well, many issues actually. But one of the significant issues is the issue of petroleum revenue management.
Mm-hmm.
We have not settled our minds around how we should manage our petroleum revenues, which again is a political issue.
Yep.
So this is why I said earlier on that oil is in the heart of our political economy. So if the political potentates continue not to have the clarity against oil revenue, it will affect the reforms.
Correct.
Okay, right. So in any way, reforms are necessary. And now even more so. And we're coming late to the party, given the way things are moving very fast globally. Many countries in the developed world have spent huge amounts of money funding research and development programs around alternative fuels.
Correct.
Those investments are now yielding value, such that basically we're shifting to solar and wind and hydrogen. All sorts of other things are happening, renewables and all that. That didn't just happen by chance. People made investment, they did the long-term planning, and they're now beginning to reap the benefits. Now they're dragging us all in that direction. And one of the ways they're doing that is they're basically now closing the taps for funding for fossil fuels. The message has been sent to all oil producing countries globally that as from 2030, you're going to see less funding for fossil fuel projects. In fact, you will hardly find for crude oil projects. You will likely find for gas, because gas is considered as a transition fuel to that time when we're going to a zero carbon world. And that time is, the line they've drawn is 2050. When I say they, we're talking about the industrialized nations. Sorry to say, it doesn't roll well off my mouth, but they control the world. They control the global economy. They control the money flows.
And this includes the World Bank, right?
Oh, indeed. The World Bank actually, as of 2 years ago, right, took a decision not to back crude oil projects.
Excellent.
It may, depending on the development angle, consider support for gas projects. But you can't take any crude oil projects anywhere near the World Bank system. It's not going to happen. If you go to other development banks, especially the European development banks, they made it clear they're also not going to do the same. The US last year put together a $60 billion development bank focused on Africa. But if you go there today, they'll say, sorry, we're not going to back crude oil projects. Now, the international financial banks say, okay, we'll back some crude oil projects, but by 2030, we're not going to do so anymore.
So essentially, if we don't get our acts together by 2020, funding is going to dry up. 2030, funding is going to dry up for oil projects.
Definitely.
Excellent.
Yes, that's where the world is. That's what's coming. So therefore, there's an urgency of actions that Nigeria needs to take to avert the adverse impact of these decisions being taken extraterritorially. One of this is the need for us to finally resolve the issue of petroleum sector reform.
Correct.
We started the process through over the last 20 years. Now we're confirmed it through policy. We have Nigerian National Petroleum Policy, Nigerian National Gas Policy, which basically commits governments to certain policy actions towards reform. You begin to see some of this. You hear a lot being spoken about by the Minister of Petroleum Resources about gas for auto gas for agriculture, LPG and all that. That's all the stuff coming out of the national gas policy. You're also hearing about domestic processing of crude oil rather than just merely exporting them. It means we need to get a refining sector going so that we stop this very unwholesome practice of importing petroleum products.
Correct.
We're basically taking coal to Newcastle. We could, with our significant production of crude oil, process all that here and export products to other countries and therefore make the foreign exchange income. So it's import substitution. And also in the process, create a chemical-based industry from that processing. Whilst from the gas side, we also have the opportunity of creating significant industrialization in Nigeria. So it's all possible. We just have to now put our minds there. So basically, the political system has now shift to become more development-minded in the interest of our economic and, in fact, political survival as a nation. Without money, we cannot survive.
Why is it that we're not able to do all of this unless we pass the PIB?
You need to have legislative impetus behind many of the things that need to be done going forward. You need to state, for instance, very clearly that this thing called deregulation is real. Only statutes, right, can make that happen. So it cannot be that tomorrow a new president comes and decides that we have not deregulated, even though the current president, through his team, have said we have. We're not quite sure whether we actually have. So legislation makes that clear. If legislation makes that clear, it's easy to get a refining sector going. Yeah? Okay. Right. Because once investors know that, oil can be traded, crude oil products can be traded at market-based pricing, then they have the incentive to invest in refining. So that's important. You also need to have a very strong governance system, and only legislation can also help us achieve that. Legislation also help us define very clearly the basis upon which investors come and make investment in the upstream, midstream, and downstream. So you need fiscal reform through legislation. Also give clarity around the respective powers of the regulator as against the rights of the investor. It will give clarity around the rules regarding how our most important national asset, hydrocarbon asset, actually is to be explored, developed, exploited, and utilized, which is natural gas. Because the rules around gas today don't really, they're not quite clear. They don't hardly exist because the petroleum law, as of today, was written for oil. When a new era completely, since the Petroleum Act was enacted, the gas age is here. It's arrived. So we need an urgent introduction of laws around gas and around sector governance generally. So that's my response.
Okay, so there's someone I can't remember who encapsulated this in a way that I have used often, which is that investors know how to deal with risk, but it's uncertainty they don't know how to deal with, right? And the uncertainty around the petroleum industry, because there is no real act in place, is what's caused a lot of investments to move out of Nigeria into our neighboring countries where a lot of hydrocarbons are being found. But one of the reasons why we started this journey of getting the PIB done is the governance in the sector. Can you unpack for us what we mean by sector governance and why that is so critical to getting the sector going again?
Indeed. Just quick point of correction. There is an act in place, or there are a few laws in place for the petroleum sector, main being the Petroleum Act. The issue is that those laws are outdated, right, for the current period, and for the future we need to prepare for.
Correct.
Right, right. To basically take Nigeria out of harm's way, right, and basically allow us to make a strategic pivot into a new type of economy, and we can achieve that through our oil and gas endowment. Correct. So therefore, we need that legislation. Now, the starting point of that legislation has to be sector governance, which is basically how do we introduce a clear set of rules, right, that very neatly packs the power of the government and the rights also of the government, right, into one area where people see very clearly. You see clearly that, okay, the minister is what he does. Who's the minister? These are his powers, these are his responsibilities, these are his obligations. Then you have a national oil company. What are those rights and obligations? And the power of the regulator. Under the current system, right, there's a fair amount of confusion around all that. Well, and that's what's affected sector governance over time, right? It is more, the time has even gone past and calling for these issues to be addressed now so that we can attract the right investment. So there's been clarity around sector governance. So that if we have a regulator, and really what you need, best practice, is an independent regulator. One that is insulated from political interference. That independence is a very good signal for investors because you know that you now have a professionally managed regulatory system and the issues can be addressed properly and they can challenge if they need to challenge without having any fear politically, right? Just as much as you need to have a national oil company that is given a statutory directive to operate commercially, as opposed to what we have currently, where all the political potentates can evade it, whichever way they have, whichever way they've done over the last 40 years or so. Okay? So we need to make this new national oil company operate for our children and our grandchildren, for the future generations. Okay? That's important. You also need to make sure that that national oil company, right, doesn't regularly visit the treasury. Because again, you're operating in a mature oil province, your national oil company should be able to raise its own money independently of the treasury. So that whatever is left in your treasury can be used to address your needs in the other social sectors, not to feed an entity, right, that is actually mature, that has amazing assets and should be able to attract its own independent funding. That's very important. Then you now need rules, right, that now signal to investors. Nigeria is such a compelling investment destination for investment in the oil and gas sector, whether upstream, midstream, or downstream, come to Nigeria. So when people look at that document, they say, wow, I have to be in Nigeria. I can't be elsewhere. If I'm not in Nigeria, I'm missing something. That's what we need to do with the PIB.
You've done quite a bit of work on the PIB. We've worked on some together. You've drafted a few when you were supporting the minister. You've looked at the 2020 bill. Did we get it right with the 2020 bill on the governance side? You can look at it from the minister, the commission, etc.
Right. Well, let me preface my comments by saying, to the extent that the PIB has now been handed over to the National Assembly by the executive, it is still work in progress.
Correct.
The idea behind our presidential system is that ultimately law is made by the legislators on behalf of the people. So effectively, what the PIB is in its current form is a set of ideas by the executive regarding what it would like to do, right, with the sector in terms of reform going forward. The legislators will have their own ideas, and they'll be working to actually add value, let's put it that way, right, to the ideas presented by the executive. So what we should expect to see is a PIB that fits the policy objectives of the country, that acknowledges that there's an ill wind blowing in a direction, and that the law recognizes that ill wind, and the law has now addressed a counter response to it to get Nigeria out of harm's way and take Nigeria, in fact, right, into a very rosy future. That's what the PIB should do. Good. So now, has the PIB done this in its current form? Let me say there's some good parts of it, but there are some areas where it still needs some tweaking. Right. Let me put it. I'm trying to put it delicately, but there still needs areas for tweaks. So let's focus on governance, which is where, which to your question, governance. Yeah. The PIB in its current form doesn't clearly address the independence issue.
Okay.
And I've said earlier on that this is a critical requirement for where we want to go with the industry. You need a regulator that's really going to be able to drag everyone in that direction, kicking and screaming, without interference. Right? Because, Nigeria is a country of too many big men. So if you don't insulate that regulatory body or bodies, right, with independence, right, you're not going to achieve your purpose. I'm very clear about that. I've been around long enough to know what happens. Okay, so that's a big issue. When you peer through a little bit more, you start looking at the provisions regarding the regulatory entities. So there's this proposal to have two regulatory entities, one to regulate the upstream and one to regulate the midstream and downstream.
Correct.
Structurally, I'm of the view that that's an inefficient structure because you're going to have regulatory gaps between two entities. So what do I mean? The petroleum sector really is a chain, and it's a petroleum chain, upstream, midstream, and downstream. And what you don't want to have is inconsistent regulation, right, along the chain. In fact, if you stretch it a little further, you can go from petroleum into electricity. So,
correct.
So as of today, we regulate both sectors inefficiently and inconsistently anyway, right? Okay. So to now break the petroleum chain a little bit further into two will create problems. Yes.
Why do you think they proposed the dual regulators?
I've heard, I can mention what I've heard, which is basically that in the upstream, the activities are different from what goes on in the downstream. That basically all you do in the upstream is just search for, find, and extract oil or gas.
Correct.
Whereas in the midstream and downstream, you process and transport oil or gas, and then you market them.
Yes.
The different functions, and therefore you need different skill sets. I think that's rather simplistic, actually. It doesn't quite work that way. When you're regulating, you need to be able to cover, there's something they call cover the field. Yes. There's a term of that, it's a technical term, and it's a very important requirement in designing a regulatory system. It means basically as a regulator, you have to have the ability to see what's going on end to end. So if you just see up to a point, and you don't see what's going on on the other side of the chain, right, then you can only regulate or take decisions within the limit of your site. So that's what could potentially lead to the inconsistency in regulation between the upstream and the midstream. Right? So you now have what they call an asymmetry of information. You don't have all the information. So how would this pan out? Let me give an example. When you look at the bill, you see that the upstream regulator is giving powers, competition regulatory powers. So is the downstream regulator. So you now have two regulators with competition regulatory powers. But then we also have another regulator, which is the National Competition Regulator, FCCB, Federal Competition Consumer Protection Regulatory Agency. So there are three then, in that case. How do you align all of these entities together on a subject of competition regulation? And Nigeria is that country where agencies don't cooperate too well. That's a problem. A further problem is environmental regulation. The environmental issues in the upstream, environmental issues in the downstream. But then also there's also a national environmental regulator, the Ministry of Environment and its sector agencies, NOSDRA and NESRA. There's been a long-standing problem around this issue of environmental regulation. It might perhaps be the right opportunity to just leave environmental regulation in one place at the national environmental regulatory level, so that there's clarity there. Then when you actually look around the world for best practice, you will find that actually you don't mix oil regulation or oil product regulation with gas regulation. As a separate thing. Typically what you do is you'll mix gas regulation with electricity regulation.
Excellent.
So you create an energy market. They fit better together. Otherwise, just have one regulator for the petroleum sector. That's more structurally efficient. So these are some of the issues that's structurally wrong with what's being proposed in the bill. There are many other things, of course, including how the government board is set up, really, and all that.
So one of the challenges that the bill initially set out to solve is a situation where the minister, in this case, the minister, which of recent becomes minister and president of the country, has the right to issue or award licenses and all of that. Does the new bill deal with that issue? The second question on the back of that is, what does the bill do with reform of NNPC as the national oil company?
Okay, firstly, the minister's role, substantially is policymaking and supervision of the sector. The Upstream Commission has suzerainty over the issue of the granting of licenses. Okay. There's an attempt to give the minister some powers, basically approval of the grant, right, and also approval of transfers of licenses. Basically, just to see that there's apparently in the context of the supervisory powers. How that will work in practice, we'll see. I would have preferred if it was all left in the commission. So then if we go down to the national oil company, I see the need for some additional work to be done there, because we've all suffered from the way our national oil company has been managed over the past few decades. There's a need for better governance of the national oil company. The governance provisions are not sufficiently strong enough. So basically, what the national oil company needs is better governance. So governance will come in different ways. First, you need to strengthen the board by providing for more independent directors, rather than stacking it with
government appointees.
Yes, exactly. That's important, right? Then you could achieve very strong governance. And also, if I could kill two birds with one stone, if you open a line, right, to an IPO, okay, for the national oil company, there's a funding problem, and that's been going on for years. Let's kill that bird with one shot. And this is not new. Many national oil companies have done this through a corporatization program. Yes, the Saudis have done it. The Norwegians have done it. Other countries have done it. So what does
the PIB allow us to do that?
The provisions are not clear enough. That's really the issue. It doesn't quite reference that. And what you need is you need to have a statutory mandate that allows you to do that. Okay? So with an IPO, what happens is this: you're immediately subject to the corporate governance rules of the stock exchange, right? In which the national oil company has the shares listed at, and even as a cross listing, even better. So strong governance comes to reporting obligations, and also how the company is basically managed takes a very high level of importance, including transparency issues. That's very, very important. But if you're able to achieve that, a lot of money will follow the company, and then you have enough money to basically fund the projects that need to be funded. But then that also requires that the company now become as independent of government and the political system as possible. So you just kill multiple birds with one stone.
Interesting. Just to say to our participants online, you can type your question in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we will come to you. I see there's a question from Ejeviome, and the first question is around host communities, part of the bill. We're not dealing with that today. We're going to have another session on host communities. But he has a question on your analysis of the regulatory frameworks, highlights many challenges. How hopeful are you that the draft bill will be amended to reflect the best practices it's about?
Ultimately, to be for the legislators, right, to come round to the issue, right? If they fully are on board, right, around the issue of the need to bring in a lot of investment to the country, and the regulatory risk, right, that the structure proposed, right, presents to investors, then there's some hope.
Okay. So one of the challenges we have is, the need to deregulate the downstream, i.e. petroleum pricing, etc. The bill speaks to having an authority that would deal with domestic pricing of a number of products, etc. What's your read on that section of the bill? Does it, position Nigeria where we should be, given the challenges that we're already facing and that's about to come our way?
Honestly, I think those provisions are, frankly, those provisions are misconceived.
Okay.
Right? If you've made a policy commitment to deregulate, then you don't need those provisions in the law.
Correct.
Otherwise, you're rolling back. Right? And if you do roll back, you're not going to have the investment in the refining sector that you need. It will basically hurt. It will hurt all the things you want to achieve.
Yeah. And so there are a few difficult political questions we need to answer, right? So if we're going to deregulate, what then happens to some of the institutions that are currently in place to serve? So for instance, the Petroleum Equalization Fund, that ensures that what petroleum sells for in Lagos is what it sells for in Maiduguri. What then happens, if we are going to fully deregulate? Does that mean the Petroleum Equalization Fund goes away, or are there ways to manage that structure?
We have to have some honest conversations with ourselves as Nigerians, right? Petroleum products are commodities, just like rice, potatoes, yam, and all those, right? They all don't sell in all these constituent markets in the country, and there are many markets. So I'm a competition lawyer, so I can discuss markets. So there's a market for different commodities in different states and different regions. The price is never uniform.
Yep.
Even in a regulated market that was attempted for petroleum products, prices were never uniform. Right? So let us understand, right, that if we want to ensure that there's significant investment in the infrastructure that would allow abundant supply to reach all these constituent markets, want this investment to come in, which is refining and transportation, then we have to understand that prices will never be uniform.
Correct.
But prices will be low, because the more supply you have, if it exceeds the demand, prices will be low.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have sufficient supply, prices will be high. It's just pure economics.
Mm.
So why don't you then incentivize the investment that allows supply to happen in a manner that not just floods the market in Nigeria, but even now allows us to even dominate the region, which we're naturally set up to do, and which we are underachieving in because we've not been smart on the issue, right, of deregulation. The crude oil is there. The crude oil is there. The people are there. There's a potential. The market, all the market possibilities are in place, except for the fact that we're messing around with the issue of price. Again, we go back to economics. So, if left to me, right, I would create a transitional period that will basically allow some equalization. And then during that period, the investments are made, but the investors would have seen a clear commitment to a sunset.
Correct.
And an irrevocable sunset. So they know that when they're making an investment, there's no go back on this. That's really what you need. Really.
Interesting.
So those agencies will no longer have a role. Yes. Yeah. So
the bill introduces the Midstream Gas Infrastructure Fund. But before we get to my question there, let's talk a little bit about gas, which is an area that you're clearly, top 5 in Nigeria. As we kind of exit the oil space, gas becomes more important for Nigeria's future. Can you crystallize for us what that means? The role that gas can play for Nigeria.
Wow. Okay. It's very important that we understand this, that Nigeria's gas endowment is almost inexhaustible. So basically, for several generations to come, we'll have gas for use in this country. The gas we have in our records today is literally the largest in sub-Saharan Africa. But this is gas that was found accidentally. No one went looking for that gas. In fact, what we're hearing from those who have the science is that the gas that we have not gone exploring, which is there in our deeper dimensions within our oil fields, potentially could be about 3 times what we know. But let's just focus on what we have currently. What we have currently has the potential of making Dubai look like a joke if we use our gas properly. We can transform this country beyond what we can even dream of today. That's the wealth we're actually sitting on. So many industrial enterprises for export and for domestic use could result from the proper governance and utilization of these gas resources, which we're not doing currently, because we don't have a gas-specific legislation today. So the rules are not clear. We need to introduce the rules. We need to also now incentivize investment also through the fiscal legislation for gas. Right? Okay. So basically, what the PIB has potential of doing for Nigeria, right, is introducing terms to an investment community that makes investment in Nigeria gas so compelling that investors say, I would rather be in Nigeria than anywhere else.
Correct.
Knowing that the resource is there in abundance. and the proper governance framework and fiscal framework is in place. That's what the PIB
has this PIB done it? If not, what should this PIB, what should be included in this PIB to ensure that we get those investments in?
Okay, right. I think the PIB is almost there with this, right? Okay. So I think in fairness to the drafters, they've done a damn good first cut of it. So again, it just needs a few enhancements in the upstream, so that you're able to just take gas as a separate business, in the upstream for supply downstream. Now in the midstream, I see the necessity for it's just a slight tweaks in the fiscal framework, right? Why is this? Let's assume that we only have a 10-year window before funding comes in for oil projects, dries up for oil projects. You need to make sure that all the critical infrastructure you need for gas is in place. So you can't be stingy, right, with your fiscal proposals for investment in the midstream, right? So all the investments, right, that you need must happen without fiscal adjustment. Then in the downstream, you also need to tweak the fiscal regime to make sure that all the big industrial plants necessary, right, to come into Nigeria for jobs and for GDP outcomes. So this is now gas for development. That's got to be the mindset. Correct. Gas for development. That all those GDP outcomes are achieved through the way you just structure those terms in a way that says, you know what, Ghana, what's Ghana? Nigeria. What's Trinidad? It's got to be Nigeria. Qatar, no, I better go to Nigeria. That's really the pitch Nigeria has to make. We're competing for limited
all these countries you've mentioned, all these countries you've mentioned have just a fraction of the gas we have in Nigeria, but they've used their gas to grow their GDP.
Well, certainly for Trinidad, right? It's got a fraction, but Trinidad is making superior returns from its very limited gas resources. So Trinidad today has 16 TCF going into its Ponte Lisa's industrial estate, but it's making several billions of dollars annually, right, from there, right? Even though that 16 TCF is declining. Nigeria's gas is inexhaustible, but it's making significantly less than Trinidad. Ghana's gas is like a drop in Nigeria's ocean. Equatorial Guinea, just across the pond, right, is doing extremely well with its LNG plants, and which it wants to expand. If you just look around Africa, right, Africa is rising and rousing around the issue of gas. It must never be the case that Nigeria, that had the opportunity to swamp the continent with gas, right, fell down because it couldn't resolve its PIB legislation.
Okay, so this gas is the same product we need for power generation. It's used in fertilizer plants, it's used in other forms of industry, etc. If we have so much of it, why are we having all these issues with pricing of the gas that goes to, say, the oil companies, the generating plants? Why don't we just give it to them almost for a laugh?
Well, it's a resource, so it's got value. You can't give it for free, surely. What you need to do, again, we go back to economics, right? The pricing framework doesn't send the right signals, right, for investment in certain types of gas projects. So I think we need to tweak the pricing framework in a manner that allows us to move towards a market-based pricing. Again, you go back to the idea that it is a commodity. So don't fix a price for a commodity, right? Let the market determine that price. So basically what will happen is suppliers will contest for that market rather than you basically determining who gets what at what price. That hasn't worked. Or at least it's worked up to a point. We also have to look at the contract systems, the way we've structured our contracts, our upstream contracts. A lot of our gas resources are locked up with companies that basically have many options. So when you are in 10 or 15 different countries, you're looking to put your money, right, behind a project that will give you the best return. So we have to have that understanding. So that game theory that goes on amongst big oil companies, they'll go for the best. So what will happen is if your terms are not good enough, your gas gets locked up in the licenses you've given them. So you need to tweak those license terms, right, to ensure that if they're not using the gas, they drop it. Or you have a use it and lose it system. Which is what the PIB is also trying to introduce, which I think is a very good requirement. You use it or you lose it. Because Nigeria doesn't have the time that some of these companies have. Or Nigeria also doesn't have the options that these companies also have. Our time is limited, and we have 200 million people today behind us. Well, tomorrow, there'll be another 400 million people. So we can't wait for that game theory. So we need to basically adjust our contract systems, right, in the upstream, adjust the fiscal system as well to send the right pricing signals, and then the governance rules. Then we'll get to where we need to go.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Now, I know this is not core to the PIB, but I'd be remiss not to discuss it now that I've got you here. The gas flaring initiative. The gas flaring commercialization program. Can you help me just explain it in a few words, how that could be an effective solution to this perennial gas flaring problem that we have in the Niger Delta?
Okay. Now, that program was designed to achieve multiple impacts and gains for Nigeria. First, it's something you could consider as a climate action program. We displace gas flaring. We have helped the environment. Also, it helps improve the social license of the operators in the Niger Delta towns and villages where oil production occurs. So there's a big win for them, for the producers, big win for the government of Nigeria, and big win for the communities as well. Those are some of the things it's supposed to achieve. But then also consider that if you are flaring gas in over 100 locations around the Niger Delta, and over a 4-year period, that flaring actually becomes a project for different things. LPG production, mini LNG, CNG, all sorts of things, power production and all. Some Niger Delta villages will have power. Many Niger Delta people will be employed. Yeah? So basically, the overall economic and social environment of the Niger Delta radically changes in a short period of time. That's the power of such a program, waste to wealth. So it was basically a gifting, right, of a low-hanging fruit, right? Okay, to the government.
How was it supposed to work in practice?
In practice, very simple. Because basically, a taking was done within the powers of the Minister for Petroleum Resources. That taking was reserved in the Petroleum Act. You could take gas free of cost at the flare. So that taking was done through regulations that were drafted. And once you take it, you put it to investors, many of whom at that time were very interested, right, in the gas. Don't forget, the big companies don't have the time, the bandwidth, or the interest in some of these small flares.
Okay.
But there is a specialist group of smaller players with the right equipment who have that interest. Right? But timing is everything, huh? So you take it, and and require those investors to bid for it. So you select the more able, the more serious ones to basically take the gas and now utilize the gas. So all that program was designed, done, completed as of September 2018. Mm-hmm. Yes, correct. Right. So it was now left for implementation.
Implementation.
Yes, I left in this. No. When I leave, right? I leave with a wave. The world's a stage. You do your bits, you hand it over to those whose job it is to implement. Now, what they've done with it is none of my business. I have nothing to do with it. It's basically for them. But I'm watching to see when the gas recognition program will now become real. I'm aware that they have done the auctions as of many months ago, but the results have not been announced. Because like everybody else, I'm wondering why not. Yeah, but you will find that those some who were really hot and ready and interested at that point in time would have moved on to other things. So, which is why they say Nigeria never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. The opportunity was there. Is it still there?
Sad. Which also brings me to the question of, I mean, we were very close with the passage of the bill back in 2018, 2019. Both houses in the National Assembly had worked on the bill, and it was sent to the president to assent, and he declined assent. What should we hinge our hopes on this time? That after all this work is done, assent will be received on this bill. I know it's way outside of your area of expertise, but you've been around this block a few times, so I'm interested in hearing what you think.
You know the expression called TINA? There is no alternative. This is Nigeria's last chance. We don't enact the PIB, we are sunk. We don't enact the PIB, I would advise you head for the hills. We're truly in danger of events that we have very little control over.
Yeah.
It will be a strategic own goal. I can't express it in words, really. It's clear and present danger coming our way. This generation of leaders have an opportunity to take Nigeria out of harm's way. They have the responsibility too. Tomorrow's generation will either thank them or curse them because the facts are known, they're not hidden. So the question is, but why didn't you take this decision? There's no alternative. We have to take that. So we have to do it in our own interest.
Yeah. And I guess that's why we're having this chat, just as another way of highlighting to the people who should make these decisions that if you haven't heard it through all the papers that have been sent to you, maybe you hear it via this audio discussion, that we're really in deep trouble. And this is no time to play politics with what is purely an economic matter. There will be an arena for the politics, but right now we need to make economic decisions or all of us are going to go down with this Titanic.
Indeed, the PIB is an economic bill.
Yes.
It's that important.
But you know, it's been difficult to explain the fact that it's an economic bill to many of the other regimes, not just this regime, even when we had people from the oil sector, you know, running things. It was difficult to get people to see the bill for what it really is. And, you know, people saw themselves and their office. They thought it was under threat. So how do we navigate all of that? You know, so you know, different set of people, same motivation, same instincts. Do you have any thoughts on what else we can do as a firm, as a people, to ensure that people, you know, the folks who need to make this decision understand that we're really, really in trouble?
To be honest, everything that needs to be said has been said. I've been in a number of fora over the last few months. People have conveyed the breadth of the problems, of the oncoming headwinds to critical players. And more importantly, and this is really what you need to know, the government in cabinet took a decision to approve its national petroleum policy and its national gas policy. Both documents very clearly, in several pages, highlighted these headwinds. As of 2017, December, when the decision was taken by the highest policy-making organ of this country. And those policies are gazetted. So no one can say they don't know that this problem exists and is coming. So it is 3 years now, this 2020. Over the next few months, that PIB must be enacted because the records are out there. No one can say they did not know about this problem. So enough has been said. It's time for action.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. No, I mean, this has been great. I hope the folks who need to make the decisions, I hope they're listening. I hope they're reading all the documents. I mean, where I met with you last week, we were talking to the same set of people. I hope they listened. You know, that's the best we can do at this point. But any last few words before we bring it to a close? We're 1 minute away.
All I just say is that, you know, Nigeria is a crossroads now. It's that point of inflection. And it will give me a huge amount of pleasure when I'm old and gray to be able to say that when we were literally at the brink, we finally woke up. And rather than missing that opportunity to meet the opportunity, we actually grabbed the opportunity and we took it home. So I'm looking forward to that PIB being enacted and to all the great things that come after it.
Excellent, excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, it's unfortunately we're 1 hour gone, and I just join me in thanking Gbite Adeniji for being gracious with his time and sharing with us from his wealth of experience on the governance side of the bill. As we go along, we're going to bring in other experts to talk about the 4 other aspects of the bill. But Gbite, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye now.